Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Sarah. I'm one of the educators here at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California, and I'm so excited to join you today to do some amazing ocean exploring. Now, we're going to set up a couple things, and then we'll dive into what we're going to talk about today. But I've got my friend Karina controlling everything you see behind me, and she's going to put up a number. Now, this phone number is available for you to text us any questions you have, any observations you want to share, even just a hello. We would love to hear from you. So that number is 562-286-1838. Now that number will be up most of the program. We might take it away if it's blocking a picture, but we'll bring it back. So at any point during our program, if you want to reach out to us, you can go ahead and text us. Now, if texting is not your preferred method of communication, we also have an email address, which is just below that number, and you can email us at live@lbaop.org. So feel free to use either of those methods to reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. All right, now we're going to get our brains warmed up because today we are going to be exploring food webs. Now, maybe you're familiar with what a food web is. Maybe this is something new for you. And we're going to dive into what a food web is. We're going to define a lot of words so we know what we're working with. And then we're going to build a food web together. But first, I just want to get our scientist brains working. Now, you might be wondering, who's the scientist today? Well, I'm a scientist, but so are all of you watching. When you watch programs with us, when you ask questions, when you make observations, you are a scientist. So I think the best way to warm up our scientist brains are to make those observations. Now, if you've watched any program with us before, we talk about observations a lot. But I think observations are such a great tool because anyone can make an observation. Doesn't matter how old or young you are, what you study, if you're still in school, everyone can make an observation. Because when we make an observation, we're just describing what we see. And I bet right now, without even thinking about it, you're making some observations either in your brain or out loud by describing or talking about the things that you see. So an observation can be shapes or colors. It could be animals, things that they're doing. Any of that is an observation if you're just describing what you see. So one thing that I thought, which maybe you did too, is I saw a stingray. Did you see a stingray too? Those are our bat rays. Those are my favorite rays, probably one of my favorite animals here at the aquarium. But if you said, I see a stingray, that's an observation. Oh, there it is again. Another observation. Look at that. All right, what else do you notice? Maybe you notice some things in this exhibit. Now, this is one of our exhibits here at the aquarium. It is modeled after a real habitat, a kelp forest, and it's actually modeled after a real dive site off the island of Catalina. So maybe you noticed the kelp, all this plant-like stuff here. Maybe you noticed that. Maybe you noticed the rocks. Well, it kind of looks like those rays are on a loop. They just kind of keep coming through the same spot. So we've got rocks, I noticed. And then I noticed the behavior of the rays. They keep coming in along the side. Oh, here comes another one. We just saw its fin. I also notice some fish. Now, I'll have Karina put up our lower third, that phone number, and you can feel free to share any observations that you have as well. Oh, I also noticed a big fish. Did you see that? This one right here. Our giant sea bass. Its name fits because it's pretty large. There's those stingrays again. I also noticed on the stingrays that their belly is white and that they have long tail. And one of them, it almost has a little bit of a crooked tail. We'll see if we can spot that one again. Maybe you noticed that too. Any other observations? Now, what's great too is to share your observations either with someone you're watching with or with me, and then we can see we might have the same observations, or maybe you notice some things that I didn't notice, which is why it's great for scientists to work together. We call that collaboration. Oh, there's a little tail. It's kind of a little wavy shape. But we collaborate, we work together because that means we could learn more because you might see things that I don't and I might see things that you don't. All right. So you can keep making observations, but what I want to do is we are going to be talking about food webs. Now think for a moment, have you heard about a food web before? Or even a food chain? They're very similar. Give a thumbs up if you know about food webs, a thumbs down if you're like, that's something new, or a thumb in the middle if you're like, I've heard about it, but I don't really remember what they are. Excellent. Well, don't worry because we're going to talk about it. So a food web is basically the way that animals in a habitat, like our kelp forest, the way that they are connected, and it has to do with their feeding relationships. So basically, who eats who, and how the energy transfers from animal to animal. Now, I know that kind of makes it sound really complicated, but think about when we eat things, we get energy in our body. Everything has to eat to survive. And so a food web, it just looks at who eats what and where they're getting the energy and then where that energy is moving. So that's a food web. So I'm going to write a couple words down. I've got a whiteboard and we're going to refer back to it just so we can kind of keep track. So I'm going to start with a food. I'm going to say chain plus food web. Because a food chain and a food web are pretty much the same thing, except the food chain is a little bit more simple. Think about a chain is kind of like this versus a web, which is kind of tangled like that. So a food chain is just one straight line. So it would be one animal to the next, the next, the next, versus a web, which is going to involve a lot more animals. And we're going to build one later, and we'll kind of see the difference between them. So the food web and the food chain are how animals are connected. By what they eat. Who eats who? All right, so that's our food chain and our food web. Now, to break things down again, we've got different levels within the food chain and the food web. And these are called trophic levels. We won't go too much into those big words, but these are the different levels. Remember I said how it's energy? So we start at the very bottom. The very start of our food chain or our food web is going to be something called a primary producer. And the primary producer is going to be the thing in a habitat that doesn't eat anything, but it still creates energy. Basically, the thing that is using the sun for energy. So if we go back to our kelp forest for a moment. And we take a look. Do you notice any sunlight shining in? This is a recreation of a habitat. So this isn't a real one out in the open ocean. It's a real one here at the aquarium. But we do have sunlight shining in, right? You can see it from up top. And that sun actually feeds something. And the thing that it's feeding is what we call our primary producer. Now here in our habitat, it's going to be all this kelp, this plant-like stuff. But think about in your community, in your neighborhood, at your school. Are there plants around? There could be grasses, there could be trees, there could be flowers. Now those plants, they don't physically eat food the way we eat food, but they do need to get energy to grow. And so they're actually going to be using the sun. And so that is called a primary producer. Now primary means one or first. So the first one, so it's sort of the bottom of that food chain, it's the first thing, and it's producing energy from the sun. So our primary producer, I'm going to say, are plants. That's how we're going to kind of keep track of it. Now, we have to think about who eats plants. Is there anyone out there who eats plants? We should probably all be raising our hand. But it may not be the things we want to be eating, but people eat plants. But there's lots of other animals who eat plants, and some animals who only eat plants. So our next level after our primary producer is going to be our primary, so it's still the first, but it's called a consumer. Every time you eat something, you are consuming it. So a primary is the first thing to consume plants. So plants are producing energy, but the first thing to eat plants is going to be a primary consumer. Now, many primary consumers, they are what we call herbivores, which means they eat only plants. Now, some of you out there might be herbivores. If you're a vegetarian and you only eat plants and vegetables, you are an herbivore. I don't know if you're eating only kelp. You might be eating some seaweed. I had seaweed with dinner last night. So you might be eating some seaweed, but here's seaweed out in the open ocean. This is our primary producer, and then there might be some animals who are only eating this kelp, and they would be our primary consumer. All right, so our next level up, we call our secondary, because this is the first and then the second, consumer, because it's also eating something. Now these are going to be considered carnivores. Now, if you did not raise your hand saying you only ate plants, you can raise your hand saying you're a carnivore, you eat meat. Or there's another option, you might eat both. So our secondary consumers are going to be carnivores or omnivores. Omnivores means you eat both plants and meat. So most of us, I'm going to say not all of us, because there's going to be some vegetarians out there, but most of us are likely to be omnivores as humans because we are likely to eat meat and plants. But there are some animals, both in the ocean and who live on land, who don't eat any plants or vegetables, and they just eat meat. But this is kind of how we break down the players in a food chain. We've got our primary producers, which are going to be the plants. They're using the sun for energy. And then the primary consumer is that thing that's going to eat the plants. They're going to get energy from a plant or an algae in the ocean. And then we've got our secondary consumer, which is going to get their energy from eating those herbivores or that thing that ate the plants. And then it keeps building, and you have it's called the tertiary, which is the third consumer, but we won't get into that. But these are some good terms to know when we're trying to understand a food chain or a food web. That's a lot of vocab. We're going to put that aside, and we're going to build our habitat and a food web. So I'm going to draw. You're welcome to draw along with me. But let's go back to our blue cavern again, because this is the habitat that we are going to use to focus and to build our food web. So think back to those observations you made and to our list of who's a player in this food web or food chain. So that's going to help us think about the things we need to draw to add. So let's see. We talked about the sun first, right? So I'm going to grab my yellow marker. I'm going to grab kind of like an orangey color so it's easier for us to see. And I'm going to draw the sun up here. Big bright sun like we have out in the sky today in Southern California. And then, so we know that we're going underwater, I'm going to draw some waves up here. All right, so the sun is shining down, and the sun is basically giving energy to something. Who is getting their energy from the sun? If we think back to our blue cavern, who is getting their energy from the sun? We said it was the kelp. Now, kelp is like a plant. It's actually something called an algae. Algae and plants are very similar. There are some differences, but the biggest thing that's the same is they both use the sun. Oh, over here. They both use the sun for energy. So I'm going to draw some kelp. Now, I'm going to draw a couple of rocks here to give my kelp a place to hold on to. And then I'm going to use kind of a brownish color. You can use green, you can use whatever colors you have available if you're drawing along. And I'm going to draw my kelp. Now, kelp is really interesting, this algae. So if you live in Southern California, or anywhere along the California coast really, you are likely familiar with kelp. But that's not true for everyone who lives near the water if you're not in certain places. Because kelp forests, like we were looking at, are only found in about 5 or 6 places around the world. Not everyone has a kelp forest as part of their ocean backyard. I'm going to add some green algae here. Similar things. Now this kelp, it doesn't grow everywhere because it needs really specific conditions to grow. It needs cold water, which we have here if you've been to the beach. Even this summer, when it's hot out, if you go to the beach, I bet the water was pretty chilly. I bet it felt nice if it was hot out. But we have nice cold water, and that water needs to be full of nutrients. Now we think about when we're eating things, we want to eat healthy foods because they have nutrients, which are like vitamins and minerals and things that help our bodies stay healthy. And there's nutrients in the water too. And things like kelp, they need nutrients to help them grow as well. So our kelp here are different kinds of algae. They're using the sun to grow. So our kelp is going to be our primary producer. There's our kelp. Just like that. Now, that next term we talked about, the primary consumer, is the thing that eats the kelp, the thing that eats plants. Now, in a kelp forest, if we go back to Blue Cavern, we won't actually be able to see it, but think about what might eat the kelp living in a kelp forest. Now, you might see some fish in here, and fish might nibble on them a little bit. There's going to be a lot of animals that aren't in this exhibit, but that live down here at the bottom that are going to be feeding on kelp. There's a kelp crab that looks like kelp and can feed on it. Some other crabs might. Some snails might. There's another animal that's main food is kelp. Let's see if Karina will bring up a picture. Ta-da! Have you seen this animal before? If you've been to our aquarium or you've been to a tide pool here in Southern California, or pretty much mini tide pools anywhere along our coast, you might have seen a sea urchin. So our sea urchin, this spiky ball right here, they are going to be eating kelp. Pretty much the only thing they eat is kelp. It's their favorite food. They stick to kelp, but they eat a lot of it. Now, our sea urchin has their mouth on the bottom. They have 5 teeth, and they use those teeth to just munch the kelp. So I'm going to draw some purple sea urchins in my habitat. Now I'm going to draw them down here on the rocks, just kind of like little spiky circles. Now sea urchins, they have sticky feet, suction cups like sea stars do, that help them to hold on. So they do live on hard surfaces, but they love eating kelp. All right, so our sea urchins, they are going to be our primary consumer because they are the first thing to eat that first producer. So I'm going to write primary consumer. And I'm going to point to some sea urchins. All right, so we've got our primary producer, which is the thing that's using the sun for energy. Then we've got our primary consumer, which is the thing that's eating that primary producer. Now we need to add an animal that feeds on our primary consumer. Now, there's a few animals who might eat sea urchins. I'm going to stick with one of them, mainly because it's one of my favorite fish. Also, it's easier to draw than the other, but I will tell you what the other one is. But the animal that eats our sea urchins, there is a fish called a California sheephead. Now, before we bring up the California sheephead, think about why there might not be a lot of animals who eat sea urchins. We go back to a picture of the sea urchin really quick. What do you think the challenge is to eating this animal? What do you think? Do you think you would want to take a bite of this animal? No, probably not. It's covered in spines, and it's got a hard shell-like structure covering its body, so you might hurt your mouth or break a tooth trying to eat it. So very few animals are going to be eating this animal. However, the California sheephead has very big teeth and a very strong jaw. So this fish is called the California sheephead. They are found in kelp forests, and they feed on sea urchins. Now, I think they're really cool, very interesting fish. As you can see, they've got this lower jaw right here that's white, this big bump on their head. That tells us that they've got a lot of muscle and structure here in that really strong jaw to help them bite. Now, also, I can look at this fish, and I can tell you that I know for certain that this fish is male. It's a boy fish. And that's because the males and females look very different. In the ocean, sometimes, and on land too, sometimes animals might look exactly the same, male and female, and we can't tell by looking at it. But for this fish, the California sheephead, the bodies look very different. One of the biggest differences is the color. A female California sheephead is all this kind of pink color. I know this picture kind of makes it look washed out, but it's kind of like a rose color. And a female California sheephead, their whole body is that rose color. For a male, it's going to be black on one end and black on the other. The other difference is the shape. So the shape right here, this bump on their head, we only see in the males. But they all have this lower jaw that is white. But both females and, oh, here's a great picture. This is a female California sheephead. So you can see its color is very different. Its body shape is different, but it does have this white lower jaw. Now, really interesting about California sheephead is they are all born female. So every California sheephead egg that hatches looks like this. It's a female. And then when there's a lot of food or when they need one dominant, one strong male to kind of protect the group, one will transition. Their body will change from male to female. Science is amazing. All right. Anyways, though, they all eat sea urchins. With their big, strong jaws and those big teeth, they eat sea urchins. Even though they have all those spikes on their body, California sheephead will eat sea urchins. So I'm going to draw a California sheephead here in the middle and try not to erase the rest of my drawing with my left hand. So I think it's really easy to start with a rectangle to help us draw, like that. And then I kind of make almost like a little swoopy triangle, and then kind of fans out as their tail. And then remember they've got kind of the bump on their head, but then a mouth like that. And then they've got an eye. They kind of are grumpy looking. I think a lot of fish are grumpy looking. They've got this fin on their back, another fin here in the middle, and then their fin on the other side. And then, so we can tell by the color, we can color the middle part red. So this is our California sheephead that is going to be eating those sea urchins with those big teeth. Now I'm going to help Karina find a picture because we have a picture of a California sheephead face on, and you'll see just how big their teeth are. All right, so we're going to check out what their teeth actually look like. And I'm going to color the ends. All right, let's. All right, now my sheephead has the black front and back and the red in the middle. All right, let's check out this photo. So this is a California sheephead out in the open ocean. And if you take a look really close, you can see these big old teeth. Now, most fish have really tiny teeth and they don't really use their teeth to feed, but California sheephead definitely uses their teeth. They use them to pluck the sea urchins off of rocks, to pull them off, and then to feed on them. All right, so then I'm going to label my California sheephead as my secondary consumer. All right, so if we go back to the drawing, we have our primary producer, our primary consumer, and our secondary consumer. Now what we've just built is a food chain because it goes from one to the next to the next. Basically, we've got our kelp, that then leads to our urchin, which then leads to the fish. But in any habitat, that is too simple because that's just one line. But we know there's a lot more animals who live in that habitat, and a lot of those animals might eat the same thing or might get eaten by the same animal. Like the California sheephead doesn't only eat sea urchins. Now, they may be its main food source or its favorite food, but they can eat some other things as well. Those sea urchins Their main food source is just the kelp. But other animals who eat kelp might be snails, and they have other algae they can eat. So that's where we get a food web because there's a lot of different animals eating a lot of different things. Now, I mentioned that there was another animal who eats sea urchins, and that is going to be a sea otter. So sea otters would be another animal who eat sea urchins. So if we added a sea otter up here, it's going to be my sea otter. Not the best drawer, but that represents our sea otter right here, floating in the water. I'm going to draw a little urchin on his belly. This animal also eats this thing. So now we no longer have a straight line. The otter's eating something else. Now otters will also eat other animals. They'll eat snails. If I draw a snail here, that snail might eat the kelp and it might get eaten by the sea otter. So that's where a food web comes into play because it's this tangled kind of net of all the animals in one habitat, who they're eating and who's eating them. And so it becomes a more complex system than just a food chain. But what's important to note is that every animal in that food web or food chain is important. They all play a role. If we go back to Blue Cavern, so when we look at Blue Cavern at a kelp forest, there's a lot of animals in there, and they all play an important role in building this habitat and being part of it and in that food web. So when we look at any habitat, we might be able to draw a food chain, but really it's more important to focus on that food web because there's more players involved than just a straight line. Many animals might eat more things, and it's also advantageous for an animal to eat more than one thing because if that one thing disappears from their food web, it can be really dangerous for that animal. And so most animals will eat more than one thing. That big fish we just saw go by will eat a number of different fish. If it just relied on one fish and that one fish disappeared, it could be really dangerous. This shark here, this is called a leopard shark. They eat lots of different things. They eat things they can find living on the ocean floor, crabs, shrimp, other shelled animals. And so they have a varied diet, and that plays into that food web. It gets really complicated and complex, but they're all important. All the animals here in this habitat play an important role in that food web. All right, everyone, we are about out of time, but I just want to review a couple of things. We talked a lot about a lot of big words, but basically what we want to remember is we built a food web. Oh, we've got our picture here. We built a food web. We talked about primary producers, the thing that use the sun for energy, those plants or algae. We talked about primary consumers, that first thing to eat those plants, our sea urchins. And then our secondary consumer, which is our second animal to be eating that first consumer. And then we talked about that food web itself, how it can be complex. It's really important, and all animals in a habitat play a role and are important. All right, everyone, I hope you had a good time exploring with us today. We have more programming next week, so we hope to see you then, and keep exploring in the meantime. Bye, everyone.